screen. And we will be recording and sharing the slides. And so just letting folks know that we are recording, especially for the main sessions, just so folks can get a chance to see and see the panel lists when they come through. Right, next slide. This is our agenda for today. We're already started now. We are at the welcome and introductions. We're then going to move into insights and accomplishments. Again, some just quick background and talking about a few very quick accomplishments, grounding and reflection work. And then we're going to move into our panel and Q&A. And really the panel is going to be about rethinking nonprofit sustainability through a movement building framework. And so you all will get to hear a whole lot more about that framework and some discussions in that space shortly. We'll take a quick 5-minute break and then we'll move into breakout groups, one breakout group, and then we'll do a presentation around movement building roles, another quick breakout group, and then closing and next steps there afterwards. As our icebreaker in the chat, if you want to first include your first name, pronouns, which funding stream that you're in, and then project or organization affiliation. And I'm very rude. I didn't even start by saying, hello, everyone. I'd be at Altine Gibson Health Resources in Action. I serve as the director for the funds. So I'll do that, she, her series. And then a fun question. It's a leap year. It's a leap day today. And in a time of more traditional gender roles, Ireland has a custom that women can propose to men on leap day. If you have a favorite tradition, please, as you introduce yourself in the chat, include what that favorite leap year or tradition is in the chat. So we have folks coming in from all different parts of Massachusetts. So glad that you all are there. And folks, don't forget, if there are some favorite traditions, please go ahead and put it in the chat. Easter egg hunt with clues. And you have to decipher them. Listen, who might you propose to? If you want to say who you would propose to, please put that in the chat as well. I love it. And you just got a proposal, Liz, from Phoebe.
She's mine, everyone. Back up.
Lots of fight for Liz
mutual. Here. It's mutual. I would propose to Idris Elba, but I'm not sure what I'd do with the current husband.
He would totally understand.
The details, you'll think about that later.
For him, Liz.
That's mine as well. That's who I would propose to. I think he's also married, so who knows?
You all are causing a lot of problems.
Yeah, that's a check that I don't think I can cash. His wife could take me out. She's beautiful and she's a martial artist. So let's keep it between us.
There you go. Awesome. Favorite tradition, celebrating on New Year's Eve in New York with best friend. Oh, from when we were little children. That's awesome. Burning written down resentment in a bonfire on New Year's Day. That's a good one. Get rid of it. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Oh, Marie, my niece did propose on a leap day a few years ago. That is awesome. That is really, really good. And thank you all for sharing this. Oh, every February 29th is my sister's birthday. Selma, if you can put it in the chat, like, if you don't mind, how old? She is having had such few birthdays. That's awesome. So much going on in the chat.
I have a
love
friend
this.
who her son and she both turned 14 in the same year because she was born on a leap day, and so they had a party together.
That's a riot.
That is so cute. Well, thank you, folks. As you keep moving those in the chat, please feel free to keep sharing. Yeah, and so now we'll just move on into very quick, brief, insights and understanding of the funds. And in part why we're doing this is because we understand we have some folks who've been with us for a few years and some new faces on both cohort 1 and cohort 2. So we just wanted to get a chance to kind of refresh and remind folks of the work of the funds and how we kind of came about with this work. And as you all know, this is a partnership between the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, Health Resources in Action, and the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and all of you all. And DPH essentially provides oversees the funds, and we at HRIA serve as a fiscal agent. We're responsible for the facilitation, planning, and implementation and evaluation of the funds work. And the OEA really provides an oversight and help with decision-making and their expertise around healthy aging as well. And in addition to that, we also have an advisory committee that helps us to provide some feedback and expertise too related to the work of the funds. Next slide, please. And we have here, this is, as we've continued doing the work of the funds, the internal HRIA team really worked together to think about, what is our vision? The funds has a proper vision and mission, but internally too, we wanted to think about like, what is the vision? What is the mission that we're trying to put out there? The mission, the vision pretty much stayed in light of how we've always talked about it. But as far as our mission internally for the funds is to engage and convene grantees and community stakeholders through equitable grant making practices, as well as equitable evaluation practices. And this is really in service of challenging the unjust systems that we face and strengthening capacity to advance health equity in Massachusetts. And we know that that is a goal that we try to really look forward to utilizing the fund's racial justice health equity framework. So next slide, please. Which in part, you all have seen our wonderful equity before. And really the strategy of the funds is a model that looks at the root, the health outcomes to the root causes of those health outcomes. And again, with our tree demonstration here, oftentimes when we look at the health outcomes to say, this is what we're dealing with, but the health outcomes are really symptoms of other pieces here that are attached to health behaviors, the branches here. But when we're thinking about looking at root causes, we start looking at the tree trunk, those social determinants of health that you all are doing a lot of great work in addressing, and then even further with root cause is around sexism, racism, and, structural and institutional barriers, all of these pieces that we're trying to uproot and up-level in order to push this work aside. And what the funds is allowing, it's allowing us to do is to have funding that's generated through hospital capital expenditure work, expansions, equipment, those fundings really go into a pot of funding and are distributed, specifically the statewide funds are distributed in populations that don't traditionally get access to those DON dollars in order to do the great work that you all are doing. Next slide, please. And so to date, this has just really given us an overview of what's happened to date in terms of the number of cohorts that we have right now. We have 2 cohorts, one that started in 2020 and one in 2022. And the funds to date have distributed or will have distributed over the course of folks' award period, $30.3 million within the state of Massachusetts. This has gone over to about 56 awardees with, over 70 different partners. 3.4 million has been focused on, engagement, community engagement, and really thinking about those. How do we bring those most impacted to the table? 6.4 million have gone to Massachusetts-based partners, and the 19.9 million goes to primary awardees. And you see the breakout here. We have about 28 PSC grants, 10 healthy aging, and 13 CHIP. Additionally, too, we are currently at a grant making cycle now that will bring forth where we're going to release another 15 million this fiscal year for another group of cohorts. So you all will have a third group that's going to be coming on board. Next slide. So this slide is really a reflection of, you all did a wonderful survey that you all filled out last year. And this survey was really to have a better understanding of, where are people doing the work, what communities are folks focusing on their work. And so cohort 1 and 2 participated in this survey. And overall, you all are working and doing this amazing work across 169 different municipalities in Massachusetts. And when we break those off and we think about what that looks like for PSE, CHIP, and healthy aging, in the next slide, you'll see that as far as PSE related work in both cohorts 1 and 2, there are 89 people are working across 89 municipalities. And this also too, additionally, thinking about the 6 awardees who are working statewide. When we look at the CHIP awardees, they're working across 69 municipalities, with 1 awardee working countywide in the Berkshire, Franklin, and Hampden County area. And then when we look at healthy aging, this work is being done across 76 municipalities in Massachusetts. And again, one awardee working countywide in Franklin County. And so with the spread and depth of this work, some of the things that this has resulted in is a culmination of, different projects really coming in and flourishing and pushing the work. So we've had accomplishments such as passing inclusionary zoning that would then provide additional that would then require affordable units to be set aside when new market development being built. So those are some of the things that are happening in this work, promoting an expansion of low threshold permanent supportive housing for unaccompanied adults with disabling conditions. Then we also had a group that culminated a 3-year project working several hundred hours with residents and staff to create a roadmap for how their community can best be a good place basically for folks to age. in place. And so those are just a few very brief highlights of some of the work that's going on in the community and across Massachusetts. And in a later time, you all have done your virtual site visits, and we'll be sharing the year 3. You'll hear more about the year 3 reports and hear a little bit more about all the amazing work that you all have done. But this is just really an appreciation for all that you all are doing in your partnership with us, and to bringing some additional folks on board to continue adding to this work that we're doing. And so with that, I just want to give you all 3 cheers and just congratulations and celebrations for all of this hard work. And then I will pass it on to my colleague, Jamia.
Good morning, everyone. Can we actually stop sharing for a second? That's okay. Just so that it might be a little bit easier to present this way. So as albeit just uplifted a lot of the successes we've had and the impact that we've had, and the ways in which we're thinking about this work, the fund is at a really important time as we move into our 4th year, or through our 4th year. And it's been a great space for us to do some reflection and really learn what we need to make this a more successful process. And in the last round of virtual site visits, we gained a lot of key insights about what our grantees are grappling with, things like how to deepen relationships, have meaningful partnerships that they can maintain for the long term, sustaining resident engagement and thinking about building social capital across those networks, and also navigating leadership changes and capacity challenges with the limitations that they have, and needs to do things like strategic planning, base building, some really foundational elements, while also thinking about how they best use their time to make strategic and intentional partnerships. And so folks are really thinking about how to engage and why you engage certain people. Do you ramp things up or slow certain things down? And also, how do you really talk about your impact of your work and think creatively about the ways in which you have seen impact? How do you amplify and reflect those processes and histories? And how do you share and pass down institutional knowledge? And as we were taking this in, I, in some ways, was tasked with thinking about how to reshape our capacity building work going forward. And so when people were thinking about this work and how we're sustaining the nonprofit, the work, but also these relationships and going beyond just our sort of organization, I was really thinking that using a movement building framework would be really helpful for these discussions. And so this is something that is also new to us. So we're going to grow and learn together about what movement building is. But, you know, at its root, it's really an opportunity for us to collectively think about how we make social change. And for us internally, it's for us to think about how do we really amplify our impact. I mean, Liz just mentioned that there's also national work happening. How are we incorporating that? And particularly as consultants at Health Resources in Action, who are the fiscal agents, the facilitators of this work, we sit between the grantees and funders, but also those that are doing the movement building and those that are investing in movement building. And so what does it really mean to do this work? So I'm in no way an expert in movement building. That's why we have a panel discussion to really lay some groundwork about what that is. But I just wanted to give us an opportunity to have some baseline understanding and do a little bit of reflection on what movement building is, and how we can think about it collectively to have a shared vision and a shared understanding of how we demonstrate the impact of all of your amazing work. So yeah, please start the slides again. So a very broad definition of movement building, and you can just go to the, yeah, thank you, is that it's about building collective power through mobilizing individuals, organizations, and communities to affect social, political, or cultural change, I would say. And through shared values and leadership from grassroots organizing and coalitions, movement building aims to address systemic issues, root causes, and areas of oppression. And this is the work that we're trying to do. At the root of the funds, we really want to make systemic, long-term, impactful change through a set of shared values. And we, as HRA, are really trying to provide capacity and support to all the amazing organizing work that you are doing, coalition building work that you are doing, and across the state, capturing those regional and statewide efforts. And so with this definition, I just wanted to have a little bit of time for folks to kind of reflect what is resonating about these components of movement building, and what are some shared values that you think contribute to the success of movement building. So if we can go back to that previous slide, shared values is really what brings folks together. It's what centers the work. And what shared values do you think are important to this work? So I'll just give you a few moments to think through some of that. And I don't know, can I play music? I don't think it'll go through my headphones. Maybe I can. No, I don't want to stop screen. Anyway, yeah, just to take a little bit of time to reflect, and then I would like to hear like a few thoughts of what people are thinking. So what is resonating with you about this framing, this very basic understanding of what movement building is, and what values do you think we share to be able to have a collective movement? Okay, so any thoughts? If folks want to raise their hands or put it in the chat as well, I'd love to hear some people come off mute and also share what they're thinking.
I can share, Jamia. This is Alexis from the Mass Public Health Association. I think as far as like shared, like what is a shared value in movement building, I think one of the things that strikes me about movement building is that it is not just about the ultimate result, like whatever change it is, like I don't know, whatever sort of like structural change you're hoping to see. It's more than just like that goal. It's also about sort of like the people that you're bringing along, and like the power that's being built. And so I don't know, I'm struggling to kind of like name that, like what, like how to articulate that value. But I think something that I notice in even partnering with different types of organizations is, you know, recognizing when we're talking to some partners who we may have the same end goal in common, but how we get there, who we're bringing along, how like power is sort of being shifted along the way might be different. And I think that is like that right there, like that value of sort of bringing people along and sort of, yeah, building out that type of power is a value that I think is really kind of like core to movement building.
Thank you, Alexis. Yeah, I think you're really talking about like the relationship building and deepening your connection beyond sort of transactional to really meaningful work that moves you through. So it lasts beyond just the social change you're trying to make. Deb?
I find movement building really challenging more challenging at this moment than it has been because of divisiveness, because of finding the shared values. We can talk about the shared value of everyone having a right to safe shelter. And yet you sit with people sometimes with shared values, but there's so much, and I live in one of the rural resort communities, so we have some real issues around protecting our own stuff and believing that people have right to dignity and integrity, all of those values. And there's a lot of verbiage, but I think it sort of goes back to the different people have different ways of getting there. But really having the capacity to dig down beyond yes, I think that this is what people should have a right to what does that mean for the way I live and the way I am in the community that I'm in. So it's, I don't know if I'm being clear, but it's become a much more challenging place to be for those kinds of reasons. That was the thought that came to me. Thanks.
Completely understand what you're saying. I'm hoping that's also resonating with other folks, particularly those that are also in rural communities. Thank you, Deb. I don't see another hand, but I also want to acknowledge what's in the chat. Kathleen talks about shifting from activism to a revolution, which is so important. So I want to thank you for uplifting that. And then Lee Allen talks about acknowledging restorative school culture, acknowledging the skills and power a gap holds is necessary to truly understand how to best harness those skills and power for the goal of the collective, the power of collective action in living cities. And is that like an actual resource or just a quote from that resource? I wanted to. Okay. Thank you. You are breaking up. I'm sorry. It's staticky, but I can kind of hear you.
Sounds like you're underwater, kind of,
Yeah,
Liam.
sounds like you're underwater. It's okay. If you could put it in the chat, that would be great. Thank you so much. And then I will let Ayn. Is it Ayn? I'm sorry. You see your hands up. I'll let Ayn have the last word.
Oh, I just put it in the chat. I was just going to
Okay.
say there's something emotional about movement building that makes it beyond institutional or corporate, that I think that is truly grassroots, and that's how changes have really been made in our country. And I think that's what's missing is a lot of times, people who want to help come in with a solution, and it really needs to come from the community, and that's what we're trying to do. And there's a balance between all of it, right? And so movement building, I guess, how do we do movement building within the context of 2024 and beyond?
Thank you for that. And I hope that we can have some conversation about that in the panel. So I'm going to speed us up a little bit. If you could start the slide again, I'm going to actually go to the last slide. And we're going to talk a little bit more about our values, but I think I will put that in after. So skip to the next slide. Sorry, two after this, the next one. I think one of the things that that might be helpful also in the context of this conversation is that we are really trying to think about like the roles that we each play in this space. And so you guys are bringing up some really important context, and I see that there's still stuff going on in the chat, which is great, is that like, why is this so challenging in this moment? And what does it mean to really do the grassroots on the ground work and feel supported by community and by funders to have those resources to be able to do that really important work? I think I think someone did put in the Building Movements Project, which is a really great resource for how we do this work collectively. This is a framework that they use and also some of the learning that we're doing. But I think that this framework is really important because the conversation we're about to have is going to be with two community organizing movement building groups, and then funders who are working to invest in this type of community building group and thinking about what is all the work that needs to happen to have successful movements. And this framework really allows us to think about how we move from just those sort of transactional collaborative relationships to more transformational relationships. And it's about shifting power. It's about shared values. It's about common analysis. And I think one of the things that Alexis had even brought up was like the ways in which you get there to not just get to the goal, but you want to have the more transformational relationships, not just a shared interest that you see in transactional, not just the common targets, but you really want to move the goal line collectively by having an understanding of what it means to do this work, an interconnection, intersectionality, and the ways in which we build our relationships. And so as we dive into the panel, I really want us to think about, you know, what are all the spaces that we're in? How do we uplift movement building? How do we do it together? And how do we really deepen those relationships? So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the panel, and we'll stop sharing, and please join me in welcoming Aditi, Carolyn, Deetra, and Rory, who will be joining us. They will be doing their introductions, but we've had a few conversations together, and I'm just excited for the perspective, experience that these folks will be bringing to this conversation. We will, if we can spotlight all the folks, and we'll get going. Spotlight. Okay. Trying to help you out too. Okay, so welcome, emoji, hand claps, and things in the chat. Yay. So to get us started, it'd be great if you could share your journey of movement building that inspired or defined your commitment to this work, and what, if anything, additionally you want to share related to the conversation we were just having, like what about your role in movement building and what values you feel contribute to that work. And we can start with Aditi.
Thanks, Jamia. Hi, everyone. My name is Aditi. I use she or they pronouns. I am the Deputy Director at the Lenny Zakim Fund, which is a grant-making and capacity building organization based here in Boston, but serving sort of mainly Eastern Massachusetts with a couple of grantee partners out in Western Mass as well. And it's our focus really to work on achieving social change in our communities by building bridges between grassroots organizations, the people they serve, donors, and other community leaders and stakeholders through the work. And it's worth noting that we fund organizations with budgets of $350,000 or less, so really small grassroots organizations. And in recent years, we've tried to make a real shift into supporting organizations that are primarily doing this movement building and organizing work, focused on things like mass mobilization, inside game work, and just transition and solidarity economy initiatives, as well as also part of the conversations that we're having as a funder to recognize, like, how can we shift what we're doing to better work together with our grantee partners. My personal connection to movement building and organizing is just it's this concept of caring about other people. And this sounds really cliche, but I think during the pandemic, Dr. Anthony Fauci frequently said, I just don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people. And I feel like that's something that I really have internalized and tried to live by, which is just this reality that everyone is deserving of empathy and compassion, and also that our society is just structured in ways that so many people are left out of so many opportunities, not just opportunities for advancement and growth, but just opportunities to even survive and get basic necessities. And that really is where some of my drive comes from, I guess. And I'm excited to be working for an organization that is so supportive of movement building and grassroots organizations, and recognizing that philanthropy as an institution has a long way to go in terms of shifting practices to better support and serve movement building organizations. And I'm hoping that some of that inside game work that we're supporting, I can also help implement at the Lenny Zakem Fund internally as well, to continue shifting our own practices. We've been around for almost 30 years. It's our 29th year this year. Fun fact about me is I am the same age as the organization that I work for, which is always a fun thing to say. But I think I'll pause there, Jamia, unless there was anything in your question that I missed.
No, that was a great start. Thank you so much. Carolyn.
Sure. Hi, and good to be with you all. And also, just apologies in advance. I'm at a conference and I'm in a hotel room, and we all know that hotel Wi-Fi is very finicky. So if I have tech issues, we will figure it out. But yeah, it's good to be here. I'm Carolyn, she, her. I'm the director at Home Straw, Massachusetts. We're a statewide formation of tenant organizing and housing justice groups that is really trying to build power and build a statewide movement that centers tenants and working class communities of color in housing policy, and creating a new housing system, right, that works for people. And I think, to me, and I'll talk about myself a little bit, but to me, like, that's what we hope for movement building spaces, right? Is that we're bringing people together across difference, but with the people most impacted at the center. And we're building the power of everyday people to shift not only what the solutions are, but the terrain we're on, right? So how we're doing the work. So I both think, how do we get, like, our folks, you all know this, right? The communities we work in, they have immediate needs. Like, I'm doing housing work right now because we see it every day, right? People are leaving our neighborhoods, they're leaving our state. We're not, like, we have to, like, you know, do some triage, right, on the immediate issues, but we want to do it in a way that shifts the balance of power, so that we're not, you know, fighting these uphill battles in the state house or whatever, but we're actually imagining together a new system, and we're thinking about what's going to work for our people in the long term, while making some of these immediate interventions, like we've been pushing around rent stabilization and foreclosure prevention, right? Which are immediate policies that help that triage work. And for me, I think it kind of, that's why I come into movement work. You know, I started out running after school and summer programs, and I learned a lot about how you just grind with young people every day and find and build joy. And you know, I know many of you do service work, and I saw, you know, we knew so much what was happening in the neighborhood in Fields Corner, Dorchester, which is where I was working, and we and I felt like we have to be working with folks to not only meet their needs, but also, like, change these conditions, right? Because we know that the young people we're working with, they have solutions, and they deserve to, like, live in neighborhoods where they can thrive. So I was like, I don't know about this organizing thing, but I kind of want to learn. And so started doing that and did Asian American organizing for 10 years, built out work in Fields Corner as well as across Greater Boston. And now have moved into this role doing statewide coordination because I believe that each of our organizations need to be strong. And I also believe that we need to be building beyond individual organizations and building that shared vision, right? What is our North Star? Where are we going? And how are we also like doing the work today that's moving toward that and also meeting our people's needs, right? And changing policy right now. And also, and you all know, I have been in Boston for a while, but obviously you all represent many other parts of the state. I think it is past due that we all are really investing beyond Boston into the region and across the state because you all have been doing that work. People have been holding it down. Our coalition is anchored by Springfield No One Leaves and Lynn United for Change. And we know the work that folks have been doing. And we also know that gentrification means that many people who historically have lived in neighborhoods like Roxbury and Dorchester in Boston now live an hour south, or people lived in Eastie now live an hour north of the city. And we need to not only stabilize the communities in Boston, but support folks who are in the communities where there have been deep rooted working class communities of color, and there are increasing numbers of those folks. So yeah, I think that's what I have to say to start.
Thanks, Carolyn. And let's all be jealous of her because she's currently in New Orleans. And I think I just looked it up. It's a cool day in New Orleans for this time of year, but our temperature just dropped like 20, 30 degrees between yesterday and today. So I am very jealous. Deidre.
Hello, everybody. Deidre Edwards, She, Her series. I am based at this time in Providence, Rhode Island. I think I'd start answering this question by saying I am a Black woman born in America, and that's where it all began. I was raised by a father who believed deeply in social justice, and a mother who felt like her community was her home and that we had an accountability to be present and available to people, to connect and build with people all of the time. And so it was just part of who I was growing up as a little girl. My work, I would say, really came through identity politics. My father, growing up in Providence, Rhode Island, was real clear. You are a little Black girl. I don't want to hear anything else. You will never be ashamed of that, and you will stand on that. You will stand up in the room even when you're the only one. Some of those fights were hard. I'd be like, what you mean I got to be the one? So there was many days in my life that I had to stand to do the things that my family enjoyed doing, whether it was roller skating and being the only Black family in the space, and people didn't want to touch you, talk to you, do anything. But it is the foundation in which I began to build. My dad organized in his college, took over that school to make sure people of color, it's called Bryant University now, it used to be Bryant College. He went to college as an adult. My godfather became the first Black man to be the dean of admissions, and that's what I grew up in. People at our house, people at the church talking and struggling about how they were going to make sure Black folks had a chance to go to college. And I took that off, and there I went to my own school. In high school, I fought to make sure we had Black studies in my high school. I went to an all-girls school in Rhode Island. From there, I went on to Northeastern, where I lived a good chunk of my life in Boston. And my work was really organizing. As a student organizer, we were working on getting Northeastern to divest out of South Africa was the early work. I worked on Mel King's campaign. I wasn't clear what direction I was going with all of my work. I just knew that being active in my community, addressing issues that were directly impacting my community at that age was critical and important. I did a lot of work with young people and helping to organize youth workers because I felt like youth workers was at the core of a lot of what was challenging in Boston, taking the risk, not necessarily getting paid well. We started the Youth Workers Alliance. We really built that out over the years. Then came a time that I felt like I wanted my work to be more political, and I made a decision to move on. And I moved to DC to start to think about what helping support youth organizing that was happening around the country. Um, I left that to do work nationally, supporting communities across the country. I worked at the Praxis Project, and my work was always about how do I, Dietra Edwards, align with a larger vision of what I was taught. I walk with the principle and the practice internally as a person, first and foremost, and then I want to work within an institution that's committed to the same depth that I am as it relates to my community. Because you can't get to transformation if you're not willing to change yourself and evolve yourself. So I want to be inside of an institution that's also willing to do that. And at the Praxis Project, our work was about supporting communities of color and in Indigenous communities that were working on different issues. And we brought people together to talk about collective movement, talk about how we build power together. We converged together to think about strategy with one another. When I left that work, because I wanted to come back home to be with my family, I'm back in Providence. I am a co-founder of an organization called Sister Fire. We are a member-based organization. We co-founded with Chinravri Prong, who is a Cambodian sister who we have a generation between us in age, but we thought it was critical that two women of color, two different ages, built something together and understood what it means to build across race and across class, across gender. So we started Sister Fire together. And we started Sister Fire by just going out and talking to people in our community and interviewing people, asking them what they wanted, how they wanted to do it. And we took that and we brought it back together. And we started bringing those folks together to say, what do we want to build together? What's important to us? How do we want to do that? What don't we want to do? And from that, Sister Fire has been in existence for 7 years. This is year 7 for us. We've only ran one campaign. It was a 3-pronged strategy, but it was because it was a Black maternal health campaign. And we centered Black women. We understood the impacts on other women of color, but we did that work long term. We said, if we're not going to change things, if we're going to change things, we have to do it together. How do we build it? And you never know how long a campaign is going to last. And you just keep building collectively and aligning with people who want to be in relationship with you, who have the political will to do the work that needs to be done. I guess that's where my inspiration is Ella Baker at my age. I believe my role at Sister Fire as a co-founder is investing and developing the leadership of other women of color and non-binary folks. We're one of the only organizations that exist for that purpose in Rhode Island. I take seriously the work that I do around helping to develop the next generation of organizers in our state, but I also am focused on their vision for what they are, the state of Rhode Island and beyond Rhode Island. So I don't try to lead from the front, I lead from the back. And my work is about how do I help move this organization to be the vision that our members want it to be.
Thank you, Deetra, for sharing your journey founded in movement building and how it has become formed into Sistify. I appreciate that. Rory.
Hey everyone, my name is Rory Nooner. I am a learning officer at the Bar Foundation. So work is based in Boston, although Deetra, I joined you by living in Providence. We're lucky to have you here. I love what the other panelists have said, so I won't add too much to it. I'm not from Rhode Island or New England originally. I'm from Michigan, and my parents, Deetra, your story of like you grew up in a house where like some of the values around movement building was part of sort of in the ether. My parents were involved in democratic liberal politics in Detroit in the 60s and 70s. And so that resonates with me. And then before joining BAR, I did a lot of work actually in Michigan around environmental policy, food systems, transportation, et cetera. And so have been involved in a variety of initiatives where, through people power, I think, and through imagination, we were able to accomplish some things that hadn't happened before. And so that speaks to me. And I think just going back to maybe where Aditi started us, just like this like long struggle for this like such a simple fact of like we're all human and we all deserve dignity is kind of the root of the work. So really excited to be here and excited to dig into this topic and learn from all of you.
Thanks, Rory. I just wanted to provide a little bit more time for us to really articulate some of those shared values. You each kind of mentioned a few or alluded to a few, but what are those shared values or visions that really contribute to a successful movement building and the long-term sustainability of that movement building, I should say.
I would say we heard it from the sister that spoke first, even before the panelists came on, and you heard some part of it, I think, from all of us. Those who are directly impacted by the issue have to lead. And for many folks, that's a problem. And you want to talk about you can't have any movement without grassroots organizing. You can't have any movement without the folks on the ground making the decisions because they are impacted, they're experiencing the oppression, and other folks may want to support, they may want to serve, they might help you feel better, but they're not going to change the condition without people who are living that experience being able to talk about it. That has to be at the core of everything that we do. And if we're not willing to do that, all the rest isn't going to make sense. And so organizing at the root of our movement and those directly impacted, our values and practices all at the same time.
I don't have anything else to add.
There's my mute. I was like trying to find the unmute button, sorry. Someone else about to just start talking.
No, I think we're all just going to say, I think Deetra articulated that very clearly and succinctly, right? And that has to be central to all the work we do.
And
I'll just add
yeah,
I just say, I think we also get lost in the analysis when we say directly impacted. If you're doing work, all of our liberations are connected to each other, right? Our destinies are connected to each other. So whether folks are queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, that we are all fighting systems of oppression that are attacking us daily in the larger systems and even in the smallest things. The smallest things that someone's not willing to use a pronoun because would rather not see you. They rather ignore you in your humanity. And so how those things are connected to each other are critical. We are willing to ignore the children of Palestine every single day to have larger conversations in the US about shit that don't really matter. So when we centering it and we say it's a value, it has to be your political will to drive that value every day, how you do it, how it shows up in whatever you do.
Thanks, Deetra. So, and you mentioned like these clear values, but how does that show up across partnerships? How do you ensure that you are making the right partnerships, that you have the same vision, the same values? And what strategies do you use to ensure that those partners remain invested in movement building? I mean, in our conversations, we've talked about sometimes partners aren't the right partners, and then there are partners that you have to bring along, and the different sort of ways in which you think about partnerships. I think, Carolyn, you mentioned some things about this in our conversation. I don't know if you wanted to add.
Well, I can give the example of Homes for All, and hopefully that can help pull out some themes. So, Homes for All Massachusetts, we are connected to a national formation called the Right to the City Alliance. And through that, all of our groups commit to certain values and principles, right? About how we, to Deetra's point, right? How we show up together, and also like what we're committed to moving in our communities. And that's critical, right? That those shared values and practices are like what create a space to do movement building. And it's hard, right? We all know it's hard. There's so much. It's easy to say we have shared values, and it's hard to like live in that. But we really commit to that, right? Our core, we share values and principles. I can put some of them in the chat, which are both about, again, how we do the work and what our vision is for the system we're trying to build. But we also know that we are on a path toward a different system, and we live in the belly of the beast, and we have to, like, we need to deliver for our people right now, right? That there's immediate things that folks are dealing with. And so we build alliances with other partners who maybe don't share, right, all those values with us, but we understand the difference in the kinds of partnerships we're building, right? So we have our core, that 12 organizations that have committed to this shared work. And then for certain campaigns, we'll build out like a rent stabilization space that's really broad. And like the shared vision and value there is, are you down to organize around this policy over the next 2 years, right? And so in that space, we welcome everyone who wants to do that. We try to bring our visions and values into the space, but we're clear on how we're moving people toward it. We don't expect everyone to be there right away. I think the more there's clarity on the shared values and how you're moving in different spaces, the more you can, get a, like, kind of deal with some of the tension. But I think it is about meeting people where they're at, but also really like having a core group that has shared values and is moving together, and is building, is trying to bring people into that. And sometimes you also have to take the stance that, like, if a group is not willing to move with shared values, that you can't have that partnership or that relationship. And that's really hard too. But I think starting from a place of understanding what level of shared vision and value we're moving at helps us assess where things aren't working and where we have to either have real honest conversation or say this is not going to work.
Thanks, Carolyn. And from the perspective of philanthropy, like how do you also approach collaborations, and how do you do this work internally to invest in movement building efforts, but also to affect the leadership in your organizations across other institutions to really invest in this type of work? What does that look like?
Well, I think I'd be lying if I said philanthropy was good at this. I mean, I think the whole system is, I mean, this is part of the why people are tired, right? Because the entire system is not actually set up to do this. Like the philanthropy was earned by individuals who then seek to redistribute their wealth to gain particular kinds of advantages. And so funders make grants to individual organizations. If we can just kind of accept that as fact, then we can like start to tackle like how we actually undo that, which like I was having a conversation with someone the other night of like, I would love it if among my grantees in my portfolio at Bar, like the idea of getting a proposal, and I'll be careful saying this, I'll caveat it in a second. The idea of getting a proposal from 2 organizations at once to do shared work, I would like, you know, that for me would be like a high bar, high water moment. Like the whole system is set up to be like these individual atomized one-on-one relationships. And so part of the work for us in philanthropy is like constantly interrogating those mindsets of like, why do we do it that way? And how do we undo it? And there's like lots of like legal stuff that's in the way of that, but we can do that. We can do that work. And so I think some of this is about constantly trying to question and interrogate like why we do things or why we've been doing things the way we were doing them all along. That's also not enough. And I'm learning a lot about this right now of like, it's one thing to say like, I want to undo the status quo. And it's another thing to like get into like some imagination about what a better world would look like. If I'm making any sense, like those are 2 different things. And to get to the imagination part is I think where it gets like really, it can get exciting, but you got to get there. And to Carolyn's point, I think people have to be on the same page about part of the shared values involved in doing that.
Thanks, Rory. I agree with everything that you shared. And I think the thing that I would add on that is we have to acknowledge that philanthropy is never going to be in a position to be leading this conversation or to be, that the systems that are built as they are making it so that inherently like philanthropy as work may want to be at the helm of some of these movements, but is never going to be able to do that in a genuine and authentic and meaningful way. And I want to tie that into what Dietra was saying, was that really it's the people who are most deeply affected by all of these different oppressive systems and issues that are at hand that should be at the leadership, at the helm of all of these different movements. English is escaping me. And while there may be those of us who are individually affected by those things who are working in philanthropy, the institutions that we are working for are not going to be at the helm. Like I can individually in my own personal time be joining movements, be engaging in that kind of work on the ground. But the second that I lead with I'm deputy director of the Lenny Zakem Fund hat, I'm no longer equipped to be a leader in that space, because the institution of the organization that I work for cannot be in the leadership position. And I think philanthropy needs to really reckon with that reality of like, when it comes to making actual shifts and changes in philanthropy toward meaningful partnerships and interdependence, to use the building movement language, to do that, we really need to reckon with like the harm that this institution of philanthropy has already caused, and the ways in which like we can support, we can offer funding, we can offer partnership and resources, and we should be doing that. But it cannot be from a leadership position in a movement, because that automatically means that someone who should be in a leadership position is likely not being given that opportunity. And then I think the other piece is like really coming to terms with like what we don't know. I think a lot of philanthropy as an institution tends to want to act like we know everything and we're doing everything right and we know everything that we're doing. And so we don't, and I say we as like the royal we of philanthropy overall, don't often want to acknowledge vulnerability or that we don't know things or that we make mistakes, and we make mistakes like way more often than we get things right, I feel like, as a whole. And that's like a thing that's worth acknowledging and worth uplifting and being vulnerable about, and demonstrating that like it's not just about this consistent power differential of the nonprofits or the movements constantly going to the funders and saying, you know, we want your support, we're being vulnerable in every situation, and the funder is constantly up on their high horse, not responding to that vulnerability. But I think once we start to level that field and recognize that, like, you know, institutions are infinitely more fallible in many ways and do make mistakes, and need to own those mistakes and recognize that there's learning to be done constantly, and that this is not, there is no sort of like achievable equity. As soon as you achieve like one marker of equity, there's going to be another one that's going to come in front of it, and you just got to keep moving forward. I think owning and recognizing those realities as institutions and organizations that are in the sort of funding space or resource allocation space is of particular importance.
Thank you.
Can
You all
I
talked a little
add
bit
one
about.
thing?
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just, what Chelsea put in the chat made me think, I feel like the other thing as organizations we have to be, and it's not our fault, but we have to be honest about, is that kind of culture of having to front for funders, we then do with each other in coalitions, I think, right? Where we are, because it's right, we've all been grinding for those grant dollars. Like, it's real. It comes from like a real place of trying to build our organizations. But I think we have to challenge ourselves to say we're going to have each other's back to resource the movement, and we're going to be honest with each other about what's hard, about where we're not doing where we're not able to do things the way we know that we want to be. And I think there are ways philanthropy, as Rory was saying, could change so that it doesn't become organization versus organization, which is what creates that. And I think internally, we still have muscles to build around trusting that we can be honest with each other, and that's not going to lead to scarcity with the funders. I mean, it does sometimes, like, I'm not saying it, but that we can build something different.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. We talk about transformation and wanting to get there, but the challenge is also is that there's the assumption that transformation is what's happening outside, right? Like I said in the beginning, what are we as individuals who work inside institutions willing to do to change? I am not the same leader I was when I started. Who I am and how I operate now, the depth of patience I have, my ability to not feel like I have to control every moment because I want it to be right. I've had to learn to let go and know some shit's going to just fall. But you know what? My folks are going to pick up what they can, and we're going to take that moment and learn with each other. And Chelsea also put in the chat, right? The fact that there's leaders that don't show up. From my perspective, that means somebody's not willing to do all the work. If you're not doing the work, nonprofits, I said this when we were just meeting as a group, right? For those of us who do grassroots organizing, the nonprofit structure is nothing but a vehicle. It is not why we exist. It is not our purpose for being. That's not how we are, right? If we could do this shit without having a nonprofit, we would. We would do it. I would not be worrying about that at all. But not all of us are in that place. And so you have some institutions, they are very, very committed to their client strategy, to what they believe the purpose is. And they're not, depending on how old they are they willing to change? Is the leader, I like being the CEO. I like being the executive this or that. that's what they're wedded to. They're not wedded to the same things we are. So you, as the organization, can't get upset. You have to say, what's your analysis of what you see and understand going on, and what value is there for our work that we're trying to do? And then have to go to what Carolyn said and start to make deciding how you engage with people, right? And then for those of us who do organizing, for people who say they're on our side and they do some things, you know, that's what a closed door, call them to the carpet meeting is for. And you can't be afraid of it. You know, there was a team of women of color in Rhode Island who had to call a foundation on their things. You say you're funding racial equity. Why do I see all these white institutions being funded and you funded no women of color? What the hell is that? You need to
So-
meet with us and go through it. Y'all have to remember, strategy and action comes together, and it's time. No one's relationship, Sister Fire did not have deep partnerships for almost 2 years because we didn't know the landscape. We had to learn, we had to build relationships. We had to understand who people are. And relationships have different scales. And you always want to remember that because it helps you understand who are you in relationship with now, how are you in relationship, and isn't it aligned?
So I actually wanted to talk a little bit about leadership, and Deidre, you just started talking about a realm of that. But I think one of the things you mentioned, or one of the things that we talk about at HRIA is, no, I just lost my chain of thought because you said so many important things, is that taking the time to build the right relationships, to understand what's happening, to be able to ground yourself in whatever your vision and work is, the people doing the work on the ground, and then to be able to then kind of spread out. I think as facilitators of this grant and some of the challenges or stigmas that philanthropy has is it's been hard for us to even tell our grantees sometimes it's okay to take that time, because in some of these projects they are new, and they're still trying to navigate all of these systems within their issue. And it's okay to take that time to slow the work down, to figure out what you're trying to create and with who. Because at the end of the day, you want to stay true to yourself. You want to make sure that your values and your individual and collective views are on the same page. And so, you know, Rory or Aditi, I would love to hear from your side, like, how do you get that alignment or try to push for that change, particularly in your spaces? Because it's like, we're the problem, right? How are we trying to solve the problem in our spaces?
Well, I want to make sure I understand how are we giving grantees the time and space they need to build those relationships?
How are you sort of facilitating or representing those grantees and their like true authentic self, so they don't have to kind of play up something that some successes that they're maybe not having? How are you trying to create that transparency in your institutions so that the ways you manage your grants are actually supportive of the ways in which these organizations actually operate? I guess that's the question. So there may be some tension between the expectations and what's actually happening on the ground.
Oh, I think I'm really lucky to work for a funder where I think we have broad recognition that like this takes a really long time, and there's not, I think, two things. One, there's not an expectation that you're going to develop those relationships overnight. And I think what Carolyn said earlier of like everyone is locked into that system of interacting. And so sometimes actually it's like we say like we want to hear the unvarnished truth, and yet like people still operate in that like interactive system, and I totally understand why. So we have to build trust with each other over time, and sometimes, to Dietrich's point, that means getting called out. The last thing any foundation wants is to be on the newspaper. Like, nobody wants to be in the headlines of the Boston Globe for a bad reason. That's what funders do not ever want, right? So like, but I think so foundations have to have the expectation that like the relationships are going to take time to build and have to be built like on honest conversations, even including about shared values. Like right now in my own portfolio, I think we're clearer than we were even 2 years ago about what our values are. And so we're having some tough conversations with organizations where it's feeling more and more like we're not aligned. And that means like perhaps an exit strategy. We're not going to do that overnight, but we're going to move in the direction. So, I think that, like, relaxing expectations that people are going to achieve, like, I don't know, the crazy deliverables around this, that, and the other in 12 months, when like really what we should be focusing on is building relationships with one another.
I think I would build on that a little bit in a couple different ways. One, I totally agree that it's all relational work. What I wish more funders did, though, was recognize that the money can still go out the door before the relationship is fully developed. And it's okay if the relationship comes after the funding, because if you're waiting for the relationship to be built before the funding goes out the door, you're not getting money out the door fast enough. It's just it works in antithesis. And organizations are not particularly nonprofits are working really hard to try and like build these relationships with people and with funders and like jump through those hoops, it almost may feel like, from the nonprofit perspective. And the more you have to do that without funding actually coming in hand, the harder that gets, over and over again. Exactly. You have to make payroll while you build. Exactly, Carolyn. So that's the thing. The money's got to go out the door, and then we can continue building that relationship. I wanted to make that point. I think the other piece is like, we really need to be better in philanthropy about calling each other out and calling each other in, as organizations and institutions, and also it's kind of an awkward or weird situation where so much of like institutional philanthropy is that I work for an organization, but it's not my money that's being given out, right? It's the Lenny Zakem Fund's money. Or like Rory works for the Bar Foundation, but it's not Rory's money that's being given out. It's the Bar Foundation's money that's being given out. And so we have, as individuals, like limited amount of like push and pull on like the specific financial elements. And at the same time, as individuals, like if we're not pushing back on our own organizations and we're not pushing back on our peer organizations in an ongoing manner, like then we're not really fulfilling the roles that we're in, is my belief. And so I think that's the other big thing, is just and recognizing that like oftentimes we as funders just wait for the feedback to come from the nonprofits, and then nonprofits are feeling like, oh, if I give feedback to the funder, I'm going to lose funding. And Carolyn, that's what you were mentioning earlier too, of this like element of not wanting to be super honest because it might lead to more scarcity, and in some cases it does, unfortunately. But because of that reality, like it is a responsibility of funders who may be more in conversation with folks on the ground to turn to their peers and say, hey, I've been hearing from XYZ organization that is in our grantee portfolio that like they've been really struggling with this like stipulation or this element of your grant application or whatever it is, and like let's talk about that, let's work through that, so that we're eliminating that like element of fear that comes understandably from the nonprofit's perspective of like, if I give that feedback, I'm going to lose funding. And we're recognizing that like we as funders really need to be doing this work at a peer-to-peer level to sort of like understand those power dynamics, and take on the burden of doing that work. And I had another thought, but I lost it, so I'll pause there.
Thank you, Aditi. I wanted to just, before we get into some other questions, check in on the chat because there are a few questions, some which have been answered. I just want to make sure that folks are getting their questions answered. So Chelsea, your first question was about seeing if the panelists could talk about shifting power, also holding the attention and engagement of the institutional leaders. Deidre sort of started talking about this. Do you feel like your question was answered, or did you have additional follow-up for that question?
No, I think she answered that very well. I think it's just, it's something that I notice, you know, that the more you try and you say, we're going to do this together and now we're going to bring in community. Now my dog is barking. And, you know, the leaders who started out at the table kind of fade away and start like sending like lower and lower level substitutes into those spaces, which becomes like less effective overall in terms of like keeping those relationships and you know, not just having it be like, okay, now this is like a community driven thing, but now there's this barrier where the community is no longer speaking to leaders at the same table.
Thank you. Did anyone have anything to add to that?
I think Chelsea, I'm not clear what the table is. I know in one of our accountability sessions, we've been for 4 years, we held accountability sessions with Women in Infants Hospital. There was a young sister, LaShonda Hazard, who died at the hospital. And we were sometime in, and they kept wanting first to just meet with myself and Chinrabi. We were like, no, you can't just meet with 2 people. You have to meet with all of us. And I think they didn't understand the all, but for us, that was all of the women we had interviewed who have had experienced things at the hospital. And then as time went on, we developed a committee that did the meeting, and they wanted to shift us to be part of some larger, oh, we have a community group now that we're meeting with people. I said, I don't know who those people are. They might be from the community. You're going to continue to meet with us. The 300 women that we interviewed and collected their data, or we'll all show up here for you. Like, you have choices here. You always, and I said, you have to sometimes put the pressure where it needs to be. And if people aren't coming back, you say, we'd like to understand how much decision-making power does this person have that's coming to the table? How much knowledge and experience do they have? Where does that stand? Why we asked you to be at this table? You can't just let it go by. You have to sometimes just call the people on because it is important. It's important to your work. It's important for how the work gets done because it creates lags and all of that in the process. So some of it, all of us hold accountability differently. But you have to think about what's the strategy that's going to help you be able to hold that accountability in that space. And remind people why you have values, right? Like I always go back to that. I always tell people our theory of change, how we believe change happens and why it happens is what guides us how we develop our strategy. So having people at the table, I would want to educate and help that young person learn that who's showing up because they are a valuable person. I see their humanity, but when it comes to making decisions, how does that need to happen? And holding that accountable. And that shit is a lot of work. And I say it like, I'm not saying like it ain't nothing because, you know, this grade didn't come from nowhere. Trust me.
Phoebe had a question, and I think Carolyn, you might be able to add some insights to this. How do you help people understand the incredibly slow and convoluted process of public policy change in Mass? So the inside political game of all that, and how do you keep them engaged despite the slow and untransparent work at the State House?
Yeah, I'm assuming you mean like the base members, the members you're working with, like the people, not other organizations. So I'll
Right.
answer from that perspective. But if you, yeah. So I think, yeah, well, the Massachusetts State House is fundamentally broken, right? So the way we think about it is one place we have to be to get some of this work done and contend for power. But it is not the only place we need to be. So I think it's about being honest with people, right? Like sharing our assessment on what is the problem at the State House, right? So for us, we say the State House is full of landlords. They have no interest in moving the policies that support tenants. The Globe has said that. That is just true. And so we share the analysis, right? We're all clear. We don't like pretend that's not the reality. And that, but then we also say, like, this is the path. This is what we think, this is what we think we can do. This is what we're pushing for. This is, and someone asked about narrative, right? Like, this is the narrative change work we're trying to do. This is the work we're trying to do in the State House. This is the work we're trying to do in our neighborhoods to get more people mobilized. This is, and this is the municipal policy work we're trying to do. Like, there's different things, right? And so we know so much has to move through the State House. We know the system's broken. I think it's about trusting the people you're working with to hold an analysis and bringing that analysis to them, and not like fronting like, oh, like, yeah, we're just going to win this policy this year. I'll tell the Globe that we're going to win this policy this year, but I don't tell our members if I don't think honestly we can win. I say, this is why we're pushing. Our power assessment is that this is the problem with the State House. We believe, though, by pushing really hard on this policy, we will get closer to XYZ. We will make these narrative changes. We will make these municipal policies possible. We will have a strategy for the next 3 years. Like, but I tell the Globe that we're going to win this year for sure. And I will keep doing that. Don't worry. But I think it's not like treating our people like that. It's saying that we can have that shared analysis, but it's so frustrating. I get it. They're like, why do I have to go back to the State House? And, it's about being honest and explaining the strategy, and also listening, and sometimes being like, okay, we're not going to play that game today then. We're going to do this other thing instead. And making those balanced choices. And God, y'all, we all need to work, if you are working in Massachusetts, on doing something different, because it's not working for any of the issues we're working on, right?
Thank you, Carolyn. So I'm going to shift a little bit. We've really laid a nice foundation of what movement building is, what shared values we need to hold, the challenges that we're having, and really having that framework be at the forefront. I would love us to talk a little bit about narratives and storytelling as a way to amplify the work. There was a question in there, but it's also some of the questions we had talked about as well. So what do you feel is the power of shared narratives in movement building, and how can storytelling help to unify the work?
I wonder if I can say something here real quick, just a caveat for like what shared narratives like mean, and storytelling in particular. And part of why I want to raise that is because I am having some conversations about fundraising recently with some folks, and like how to like make a compelling ask and things like that. And sometimes I think what these the structures in which we are working, sometimes what they what it ends up feeling like people have to do is, creating a narrative that is rooted in trauma of an individual or a community as a way to bring people into the work. And I think before we even dive into what does a shared narrative look like for movement building, I think I want to just sort of amplify that what it does not need to look like, or ideally should not look like, is re-traumatizing yourself or your community members just for the sake of getting additional dollars. A really prime example of this is there was an organization that I've worked with in the past that works with restorative justice and reducing recidivism and really helping people who are formerly incarcerated adjust back to society through the work of restorative justice. And it's a really wonderful organization, and they're doing really incredible work. And it was founded by and is staffed by people who were formerly incarcerated for capital crimes. And it's really meaningful work. But when they were talking about, when they were talking about their fundraising pitch, what I was hearing was like the story of one of the folks that works at that organization, of like how he was even, like what his childhood was like, which was really not pretty. And then what he experienced that led to his conviction of capital punishment. And then he was sentenced to multiple, obviously, years of incarceration and was released relatively recently. And to stand on stage as a Black man talking through that story in front of a room full of predominantly white people, and to have been told throughout the journey of like talking about or cultivating that pitch as well, that like you should really put a personal story in that'll really tug at people's heartstrings, and so feel like he had to talk about that was really heart-wrenching. And to recognize that like this man is in order, he feels like he has to re-traumatize himself and experience those things, those emotions and those feelings and those memories over and over and over again just to get some funding. Like that's not a narrative on which I want to build a movement. Like that's not a movement that I want to be a part of if the movement is built off of this narrative that he has to re-traumatize himself over and over and over again. And I think it is worth recognizing that movements are affected by trauma, that people who have been traumatized are coming together to build this movement and work toward preventing that trauma for fellow community members, for themselves, going forward. I think that's important to recognize and acknowledge. But I think that there's a difference between owning that, like, living in a broken society and experiencing trauma can be a driver to to build a movement and organize a community, but it doesn't need to be the foundation story for that movement, if that makes sense. And as long as we continue like perpetuating like, oh, if I share my trauma, I'll get money, and funders keep falling into that trap, and that's where I will own that as like working at a funding institution, like I really want to talk to other fellow peers in this space to say, don't be asking for people's personal stories because that's really gross, and don't be asking people to tokenize their young people that they work with, or to tokenize their stories and things like that. Exactly, Chelsea. Like don't fall into that that cycle. But they're two different things, and I think that's like a really key thing to uplift at the foundation of when we're talking about shared narratives and storytelling.
And I'll let others also tap in. Deidre, I see you coming off mute. It's like, why is the compelling story always the most traumatizing story, and why is it those stories that need to be said that I always struggle with when I go into a session or anything like that, and people are sharing their stories to politicians that do not really care at the end of the day about those stories, because then we wouldn't be doing this. So I think there's always like this tension about what that looks like to actually tell the impact of the movement without getting into the trauma work, or what does that really look like? Deidre.
Yeah, I think we have to remember what kind the society we live in, right? Like, one, we love individual stories. Our work is not about individuals by themselves. Our work is about the collective experience. Sister Fire does participatory action research. And because it's the way we build our narrative, right? I named that LaShonda lost her life. Not once have we ever tried to tell LaShonda's story. What we say is LaShonda is the light that was shined on Rhode Island to force us to change the conditions. It was her light, her beauty. You will never hear us speak ill of that sister because she gave us something that no one else could. And we had to change. We pivoted to then collecting people's stories. And we said, so where are the common threads? It's where we got our data from. What has been your experience at Women and Infants Hospital? We followed the patterns. And then we could tell the story of everyone that had been impacted from Women and Infants Hospital. And they couldn't say shit to us because they were like, oh, we've never heard this. Bullshit. It's gone back generations. We had generations telling us their trauma stories, but we never asked people to retell their story. Unless they said, I'm angry, Dietra, and I need to tell them something. Okay, let's work on that. Let's figure out how you keep the anger, but you're not going to go through working your stuff out in public. Let's figure it out. But our data became the story, right? It became the story of how Black women, especially, and women of color, have been impacted by this hospital. How women who were second language, English as a second language, have been impacted because they don't have interpretation and translation infrastructure to meet their needs. How trans and non-binary folks were impacted because they don't have enough folks who have that specialty. And they go in and they have this experience. It wasn't one, we collectivized that experience and told those stories together. Because people will always want to hear the individual story because then it becomes about the individual. You pull back the curtain and say, look at all these other people, then it becomes the systemic issues. You're getting to the root cause of why these things are happening. And anytime that we work with our folks, we say, what's your vision? What's the vision? You lead with the vision. Everyone wants to lead with the problem. No, we're going to lead with our vision. This is what we believe. This is what is happening. We see this, right? That women can give birth where they want to give birth. They have the autonomy to choose. Parenting is parenting. Even for us in the process, learning new language. Not just saying mothers, saying parents, all these things, because then it shifts the narrative, it shifts the story of how it gets told. When they would come, how many people can you tell us what really happened to LaShonda? No, we're not. We had a conversation with her family. Her family said, do the work. We can't talk to you, but we believe in what you're doing. We respect people's wishes. We move on the path. We understood that we had to change what was happening in the state. Before this was happening, before Black doulas started talking about the impact and the importance of doulas, and when we all combined together, we started changing the narrative of this state. But those of us who are coming from the ground, we have the power to tell our stories because we have the collective experience. And that's where you always want to begin, that and your vision.
Thank you so much for that. Carolyn.
And I was just going to say, as we're moving toward wrapping, I think what Dietra said to me, I mean, that is the difference between organizing and movement building and service work, right? And services are critical. They are critical to everyone. But this thing, right? It's not telling the story to say, oh, this is why we need funding for our service. It's saying, this is what Dietra said, this is the collective story. And so when we tell those individual stories, the folks who are telling them, who experience it, and the way we tell it is about saying this is representative of a systemic failure and we have a different vision, right? So to me, that actually, the way Dietrich was talking about narrative and the participatory action research, that is an articulation of what movement building, like having a movement building approach to your work is, versus just like a service delivery approach.
I really appreciate that distinction, Carolyn. Thank you so much. So yeah, we are moving into closing. I know that folks probably still have other questions, but I'd love to go around and share what are some key takeaways or insights that you hope participants will carry with them from this. And like, I don't know how to describe it. Good discussion. It's not the best word, but I think it's been so many different elements of this discussion I don't even think I imagined it having, and so I appreciate it. But what are some key takeaways or insights that you hope participants will take away? I'll start with Rory and go on my screen. I'll go backwards.
Oh gosh, I'm just appreciating the last few points about, the like really taking asset framed approaches and focusing on dignity and humanity, and even the conversation earlier about like advocacy work and how hard it is. I think just finding ways to celebrate our wins, and our mobility team at BAR has, I think, taught the entire foundation a lot about what they call celebrating joy in the work, and we don't do enough of that. And so yeah, there's a lot of suffering, and how do we also lift each other up? So thank you for this today. So thank you to all my fellow speakers. It's been lovely.
Thank you, Rory. Deetra?
Sorry, I was reading the chat. I would just say that for folks on the ground, you know this work, and trust yourselves. And I know what I know because a lot of folks in Massachusetts helped me learn. It's a place I spent a lot of my life in, and I learned to understand the work there. And so was only willing to do this conversation because I have so much love and respect for the work that in the movement work that happens in Massachusetts. So I will say that. Take what you will, but always know it's in you. When none of us are empty glasses, as I tell my members, we all bring something to the table, and be engaged with each other. Those of you who are not on the ground, I say, when do you turn the mirror and say, what is it we need to do differently, more deeply, in order to get to the place you truly want to be? And sometimes that's hard because it has to be from the top and the bottom in some institutions. So I say thank you, and so gracious of being able to be here.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation and the clarity everyone brought to it, and the rich discussion from you all. I think just to echo a few points that have been made, I think that for everyone, regardless of where you are, I think what Dietrich's saying is right. Like, you can have a movement building approach to your work in different ways. And so I encourage everyone to think about how you can do that, right? Whether that's organizing philanthropy or organizing or thinking about how you support a movement building approach from your position with a large institution, or you're on the ground, and you're thinking about how you build something bigger. I think that goes a long way, and it's still hard work to do the shared value and vision pieces together. But if people come in, and I think that narrative piece really speaks to it, right? With a movement building, we're talking about systems. We're not talking about like people just sharing their trauma to share it. We're saying we believe the system can be different and must be different, and we're gonna move every day so that can happen. And just to end with, and that is I see it as an honor to do that work every day, to say we're gonna build something different. And it's hard, but you have to like believe in the joy and believe in our people and that that we have it. We just have to like unveil what is there and create conditions to make it possible for folks to lead and build something new. So just, you know, on the bad days, you just have to trust your people and trust yourself.
Thank you, Carolyn. Aditi.
I'm just sitting in absolute awe of my fellow panelists and the folks just on the call today. I want to go to the school of Deetra Edwards and the school of Carolyn Shu and the school of Rory Nooner. Be registering for classes soon. But I think I echo all of the things that my fellow panelists shared, and I want to just uplift that piece around joy and the fact that this is, yes, it's incredibly hard work to show up to every day. It is hard. It is intense. It is long. It can feel extractive in the systems that we're working in. And imagine how much harder it would be to do it alone. And I think that's where movements are also so important, is that you're not in a movement, you're not doing it alone. You have the support of your peers, of your community. You have the shared vision and the values that are driving you. And when you feel like you're stumbling, you feel like you're getting a little tired, you have people who you can lean on, and people who can support you. And then in return, you can allow them to lean on you when they're stumbling as well. And I think that's just such a key thing to elevate, that it's not what can you do as an individual, it's what can you contribute to as a movement. No one person needs to do all things, but if you can have 10 people and each of them can do at least one thing, like that's a movement in and of itself. And that's so important to remember. And we're, you know, I am here for you all and for folks, and we are here for you. And I really commit to supporting this work, but also like doing whatever I can in the role that I hold and with the privileges that I have to move this work forward as well. So immense gratitude for you all.
Thank you so much, Aditi, Carolyn, Deetra, and Rory. It's been a rich conversation, and please give it up for folks in the chat or with emojis.
Me. Jamia, me.
Oh, Liz, sorry. I tried to chat you. Okay, go ahead, Liz.
So, okay.
Not Katie, Liz.
Yeah, I know, right? So I'm Liz Maffei. I am with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and I am so proud of the work that you are all doing. I tell it to my friends, I tell it to my family, I tell it to who will ever listen to me. I am so proud. I am a mixed kid. I live in Chelsea. I was born in the Bronx. I mean, I've had a lot of lived experiences, and I just am so happy to be here and to be part of this movement since 2015. And I appreciate all of your hard work, and I try to advocate for you all as much as I can. I am not, well, I'm shy, but I'm not. In terms of this work, I am not shy. Like, let's freaking go. And I'm just very proud and happy to hear of all of your experiences, even though they're hard, because I've had my own hard lived experiences. You know, it's heartbreaking, but I'm proud to address this, and I'm very proud to let's freaking go. Let's correct these problems, because they are major and wrong. So and Jamia, thank you so much for your facilitation. I always appreciate you, and we have to get together soon because you're my neighbor.
Yes, we have to get together soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I know we're getting close at time, but I'm just very appreciative of all of your hard work. And if any way I can help you all connect the dots, I'm not a Massachusetts native at all, but my home state is not that different from Massachusetts, even though you all might not want to hear it, but from New Jersey. I was born in the Bronx, but I hate the Yankees. But I'm just gonna leave it there, and I'm just very thankful for all of your time and energy. And I know that I know I'm tired. I'm sure you all are too. Take good care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves and treat yourselves when you can.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for your advocacy at DPH. I know it's tough. So we're going to transition into a 4-minute break, a 5-minute break. We'll do a 5-minute break, and we'll just do a little bit of restructuring on our end, but try to come back at 1:02, 1:03. Sorry, I know it's a weird time, but again, thank you so much. Please grab some water, digest everything that's been heard, and we're gonna get into the breakouts to talk a little bit more about this. So thank you.
Thanks, Jamia. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks, Jamia.